The darkness settles heavy around us, like a thick velvet blanket, a comforting weight. We are wrapped only in this shimmering halo of warmth. Listen closely now to the gentle, steady breath of the bonfire, a deep sound of relaxation and ancient memory. The cedar logs you piled earlier are smoldering beautifully, collapsing into bright pockets of orange light. Each tiny snap, a small burst of sound, quickly consumed by the night. See the ancient shadows dancing on the periphery, wavering when the golden glow flares high. Feel the deep warmth spreading across your outstretched hands, soothing the chill away. We are safe here beneath the open sky, with the embers drifting up like tiny, silent messages to the stars. The fire keeps the cold world at bay. Only this soft, hypnotic flicker remains. I am Nasrullah, and this is Yacht Chronicle. Sit closer to the fire as we journey into the real first Thanksgiving history, myth versus political deal, Wampanoag Pilgrims. We leave the modern world far behind now, traveling back to a place of deep desperation and cutting cold. It is a world carved out of vast coastal wilderness in the year 1620, a world far removed from the cozy myths we often tell children. This story begins not with a feast, but with suffering, unbearable loss, and the overwhelming smell of salt water mixed with weak wood smoke. Picture the Mayflower, a cramped, weary ship, finally anchored after a terrible journey across the endless gray ocean. The Pilgrims, those tired souls, seeking their religious freedom, had intended to land much further south, but fate, or perhaps Providence, had guided them to the harsh shores of Patuxet, a place known now as Plymouth. The first winter was simply devastating, a true test of human endurance. The amber light of our own fire here feels like a blessing, a miraculous furnace compared to the meager sparks they must have struggled to maintain against the relentless New England cold. Sickness swept through their small, desperate population like a hungry ghost, consuming the weak and the strong alike. Feel the deep quiet of our own bonfire tonight. Imagine that quiet broken only by the sound of coughing and the constant fear of the unknown. They were dying quickly and systematically. By the time spring finally arrived, half of the original 102 colonists were dead. They were strangers in a barren land, clinging desperately to existence, while unseen eyes watched them from the ancient shadows of the woods. Eyes that had known this land for thousands upon thousands of years. These eyes belonged to the people of the first light, the Wampanoag. The Wampanoag knew this territory intimately, the forests, the rivers, the rhythms of the sea. Their perspective on this European arrival was complex, born of recent tragedy themselves. They had already endured their own devastating sickness, a plague brought by earlier European traders that had decimated their communities, leaving villages abandoned, fields overgrown. This fire we watch tonight reminds us that loss is universal, that even ancient nations can be brought low by forces beyond their control. The ground the Pilgrims settled on was in fact the recently emptied village of Patuxet, a terrible, stunning irony. The Pilgrims found cleared land, ready for planting, and they called it a miracle, a clear sign of God's favor. But it was a silent testament to the immense loss of the Wampanoag nation, a hollow space where life had thrived. The critical shift in this history occurred not over a spontaneous celebratory dinner table, but in the intense diplomatic halls of necessity.
Massasoit Ousamequin, the great sachem of the Pokanoket, understood power and peril better than anyone. He watched the Pilgrims, their numbers dwindling, their desperation palpable. But he recognized that the presence of the English, weak though they seemed, offered a strange, necessary opportunity. He needed allies desperately, against his powerful rival, the Narragansett, who had been untouched by the devastating plagues that had ravaged the Wampanoag. His enemy was strong, his people were few. The flickering light of the English settlement offered a potential balance of power, a precarious shield against certain doom. The fire glows lower now, its golden core settling into deep, smoldering embers. A perfect time to consider the man who bridged these two worlds. The legend often skips over the depth of the initial political calculation. The Thanksgiving myth focuses on the kindness, the shared food, but the reality began with a political treaty. A pact of mutual defense, a careful calculation of survival by the great Wampanoag leader. It was a deal struck under duress and necessity, not simply friendship. The terms of this treaty, sealed in March 1621, were surprisingly clear and deeply practical, designed to benefit Massasoit and his people first and foremost. This was not a surrender. It was an alliance built on shared geopolitical fear and the desperate need for security in a suddenly unstable landscape. Let the fire crackle softly as we move deeper into the clauses of this ancient political deal. Listen to the soft snap of the wood one more time before we proceed. Feel the ancient shadows stretch back from the golden glow of the heartwood, now yielding to the flame. A deep amber hue settles over the ground. The cedar crackles, a sharp report against the deep quiet of the night air. Tiny sparks drift upward toward the deep velvet sky, where the first subtle stars begin to pierce the smoke haze. But the warmth is absolute, settling deep into your bones, melting away the day's concerns. We sink deeper into the historical moment. We often imagine a perfect meeting, a simple shared meal, a moment of pure, spontaneous friendship. But the truth, the essential truth, is forged in desperation and cold. Look at the flame, the way it twists and strains against the wood. That reflects the strain of that first year. The 1620 winter decimated the newcomers, the English settlers of Patuxet, later renamed Plymouth. They were dying of disease, of starvation, of the sheer, unforgiving cold. Nearly half their number vanished into the frozen earth. A truly terrifying silence must have hung over their small fort. Only the sound of coughs and the slow, rhythmic chopping of wood. The fire showed us how quickly hope can turn to smoldering ash. But the Wampanoag Confederacy had themselves suffered terribly.
A catastrophic plague, known as the Great Dying, had swept through their villages, leaving vast empty fields and a massive power vacuum. Their numbers dramatically reduced, made them intensely vulnerable to the powerful Narragansett rivals, who had been mostly untouched by the devastating illness. Massasoit Ousamequin, the great sachem, the supreme leader, he observed the weakness of the English, but also their peculiar strength, their weaponry, their steel, and their capacity for sustained violence. He saw an opportunity, not for charity, not for sharing, but for mutual defense, a strategic shield against the growing Narragansett threat. He desperately needed allies, strong allies, even weak ones possessing potent foreign technology. So the spring of 1621 saw the arrival of Squanto to Squantum, a Patuxet man stolen years before, returned now a linguistic bridge, a necessary
intermediary. He was the shadow walker between worlds. And then the arrival of Massasoit himself to meet the new governor, William Bradford. The air was thick with suspicion, with mistrust, with the silence of two entirely different worlds colliding. They met not in a festive hall, but under the open sky, beneath the watchful gaze of the ancient shadows cast by the great sleeping woods. The fire is hypnotically slow now. The golden glow softens to a deep orange. The agreement that followed was solemn. 6 points of serious political strategy, not friendship or familial bonding. They swore not to injure one another, to punish any who did, and most importantly, to defend the other if attacked by external forces. It was a military and political deal, a necessary treaty, signed in the cold light of survival, under the ever-present threat of mutual destruction. This strategic alliance was the true groundwork for the harvest celebration months later, a political deal born of necessity, not goodwill. The myth of effortless friendship dissolves in the slow-breathing reality of diplomacy under duress. The fire breathes with us now. The cedar logs have turned to deep red embers, smoldering softly. The deep hypnotic heat remains, but the vigorous dancing flicker has slowed, allowing the deep quiet of the true history to settle around us. We drift now into the deeper night, contemplating the weighty cost of that first necessary handshake. The shadows deepen, and we remain beside this fire, listening to the quiet snap of history. The sound of the cedar snapping fills the air, a sudden loud crack that releases a fresh wave of that warm, woody scent, enveloping us completely. Feel the deep, profound warmth settle over your shoulders, melting away any remaining stiffness, any lingering tension. Watch the fire. Breathe slowly, softly, drawing the oxygen in and exhaling that magnificent plume of golden glow that dances on the low-hanging branches above our heads. The embers beneath the newest logs are a mesmerizing tapestry of deep orange and fading red, a gentle, smoldering heart keeping this vigil with us. We were talking about the real beginning of the story, the true nature of that harvest gathering, a reality far removed from the simple tales of sharing and grace we learned long ago. To truly understand that moment, we must travel backward in time,
not just to 1621, but back to the desolate, cold shore of 1620, when the ship Mayflower finally dropped anchor. Imagine the absolute darkness surrounding them, far more complete than the ancient shadows our bonfire pushes back now. Imagine the biting cold, the relentless wind carrying the unforgiving chill of the North Atlantic right into their questioning that must have haunted those weary survivors, huddled together watching the smoldering ruins of their dreams. Their tiny settlement was a desperate scar on the vast landscape, an intrusion of European vulnerability, facing a wilderness they did not comprehend, and which was utterly indifferent to their suffering. Their food supplies dwindled to nothing but meager grains and whatever fish they could manage to snare in the bitter, freezing waters. They were starving, they were sick, they were dying, and they were completely alone. Or so they thought. But the real history, the history that glows like an amber secret beneath the surface of the myth, tells us they were never truly alone. The golden glow of their weak fires flickering against the dense forest edge was not unseen. The Pilgrims may have felt isolated and utterly helpless, but they were in fact being observed, closely watched by eyes that understood this land perfectly, eyes that had been observing the movements of these strange ships and their even stranger occupants for months. The ancient shadows beyond the warmth of their campfires held intelligence and scrutiny. This land was not empty. It was not a wilderness waiting to be tamed. It was the sovereign territory of the Wampanoag people, a sophisticated, organized nation that had lived, understood, and governed this coastal region for centuries. And the Wampanoag knew everything about the Pilgrims' desperate condition. They knew how many had died. They knew how poor their shelter was. They knew their weapons were failing. And they knew they would not survive the coming summer without intervention. The stage was set not for a joyful chance meeting, but for a calculated diplomatic engagement born out of profound weakness on one side and strategic necessity on the other. Keep watching the flicker of our fire, keep breathing in that deep wood smoke smell, and we will step now across that invisible line into the Wampanoag world. The cedar logs shift, settling deeper into the ash bed, a soft hiss escaping them, a perfect sound for the deepening night air, that coolness resting against your back while the golden glow pushes it away from your front. The amber light catches the moisture rising from the earth after the day's chill, a little spiral of ancient smoke curling upward to meet the vast black sky above us, filled with stars you rarely see anymore. We spoke of the starving time, that first dreadful winter, where half of those who survived the journey simply vanished into the cold earth.
Understand, this is where the pivotal figure, Tisquantum or Squanto, appears. Emerging from the forest shadows like a ghost, he spoke English, a language gained through extraordinary hardship and enslavement, a long, cruel journey that took him across the ocean and back. He was the bridge, a translator, a guide, but also a political agent, working within the interests of the Wampanoag sachem Massasoit. Squanto taught them how to fish, how to hunt, how to plant corn in the fragile sandy soil, using the herring for fertilizer. He brought them knowledge, essential knowledge, wrapped not in friendship, but in a carefully managed exchange of power and necessity. Look how the flames dance now, high and thin, almost mirroring the nervous energy of that first meeting between the English governor John Carver and the powerful sachem Massasoit. It was not a dinner party. It was a negotiation under extreme duress. The terms they agreed upon laid the groundwork for decades of uneasy coexistence. The fire crackles, a sharp snap as the dry wood yields a sudden burst of sparks that rise quickly into the darkness, a brief shower of fleeting golden light. The treaty they signed that day, March 22nd, 1621, was simple and brutally pragmatic. First, they would not injure each other's people. Second, if any wrong was done, the offender would be sent to the other side for punishment. Third, all stolen goods would be returned. Fourth, they would assist each other in war against common enemies, particularly those Narragansett warriors. Massasoit needed this alliance, a buffer against his more powerful neighbors. His agreement with the Pilgrims was not born of charity, but of geopolitical necessity, a temporary shield of muskets and men. Imagine that moment, sitting there beside a small fire in the clearing, the uncertainty, the desperation. On both sides, the cold fear in the Pilgrim camp and the deep calculation in Massasoit's eyes. He watched the settlers die, and he knew this was his moment to capitalize on their weakness before another rival nation did. The smoke drifts lazily across the coals, smelling of sweet maple, a familiar scent of comfort despite the cold history we explore. Squanto became indispensable, a constant fixture. He was the interpreter, the diplomat, the resource manager, without whom the Pilgrims would not have survived the coming spring and summer. But his presence was complex, a double-edged sword that ultimately led to political tensions, even within the Wampanoag leadership, because Squanto was using his unique position for his own gain, leveraging the fear of the English to boost his own status. A dangerous game of shadows and influence that played out directly under the new golden glow of the settlement fires. The months that followed were characterized by this uneasy cooperation, planting, tending, harvesting, all under the guidance of Squanto, all under the watchful ancient shadows of the Wampanoag, who had inhabited this land for thousands of years. They taught them to plant the corn and beans and squash, the three sisters that sustained life. The sun grew warmer, the days grew longer, and the golden light of survival began to shine more brightly on the struggling little settlement. Feel the deep warmth sinking into your shoulders, the quiet, immense peace of this place.
where the only sound is the persistent, quiet smoldering of the fire. The flickering light pulls the shadows from the trees and then pushes them back, a slow, endless, hypnotic rhythm. The embers beneath the wood are a deep, steady red, the color of old wine, the color of enduring memory. The earth beneath you is settling.
Down for the long night, and you are safe here by the ancient fire, watching the golden glow fade and strengthen, fade and strengthen. The autumn approached. The harvest arrived, full and bountiful, not simply because of hard work, but because of native wisdom and a strategic alliance that secured their food and their lives. And that harvest, that moment of relief and plenty, set the stage for the gathering we now call Thanksgiving. The wood is turning to ash now, sinking deeper into itself, a quiet mound of glowing warmth, pushing back the endless, dark night. A slow, quiet peace descends over the clearing, a perfect blanket of silence. A deep, deep quiet, just the sound of the crackling wood, drawing you further down into the still warmth of the bonfire light. The cedar crackles softly now. Listen to that sound, that whisper of burning wood. Fire breathes slow and deep, a living thing, right here beside us. Feel the warmth settle across your knees, your chest. That steady, comforting weight against the cool night air. The flame dances upward, a column of molten orange light, chasing the ancient shadows away. But never fully succeeding. They linger just beyond the golden glow, where the forest waits. We settle deeper into this moment, this safe circle of heat and memory, letting the amber embers pulse and fade and pulse. We spoke last time of the Great Treaty, the essential political deal struck in the chill of that uncertain spring of 1621. A pact made not from simple friendship, but from strategic necessity, from mutual fear and need. The Pilgrims, the English settlers, they were still so profoundly vulnerable. You must remember that. They were a people halved by the deep, terrible sickness of that first winter. 1/3 of them already buried in the frozen ground, hidden beneath carefully smoothed earth, so that potential enemies would not count their weakness. Look now at the way the light washes over your hands. It is the color of frail hope, but hope underpinned by absolute desperation. Massasoit Ousamequin, the sachem of the Pokanoket Wampanoag, knew this weakness. He also knew the growing danger from rival tribes and the silent spreading devastation left by the earlier plagues that had ravaged his own people. The treaty was a fragile shield, a strategic gamble, a promise of mutual defense, a guarantee of cooperation against shared threats. And central to that alliance was one man, one essential soul, who navigated the terrifying space between two worlds, Tisquantum. His name drifts on the smoke,
carried by the rising heat. Feel it on your face, that gentle draft of memory. 'Tis quantum, squanto, a survivor of enslavement, a traveler who knew the harsh, unforgiving lands of Europe, and yet still held the deep, intricate knowledge of this soil, this coast, this life. He was the bridge, the fragile, necessary connection, and the fire reflects his duality, burning bright, yet always shadowed by loss. The pilgrims needed to learn, or they would surely perish. They needed to understand the seasons, the tides, the very language of the earth. And Tisquantum was their teacher, appointed by the authority of the Wampanoag leadership to uphold the new alliance. He showed them how to read the clouds, not as a European sailor would, but as a native son of this place, watching for the subtle signs of rain or drought. He taught them the sacred art of planting the corn, the essential life giver, the core sustenance that would determine their fate. He instructed them in the way to hill the earth, forming protective mounds like small monuments to survival. And crucially, he showed them the necessary ritual of fertilization, using the silvery fish, the herring or alewives, drawn from the streams to enrich the exhausted coastal soil. Listen closely. The fire gives a sharp snap now. That is the sound of effort, the sound of the dry seed cracking open, revealing the promise of life against the harsh reality of the May sun. The settlers spent that spring and summer bent over the ground, their hands blistered, their backs aching, their hope measured stalk by stalk, leaf by fragile new leaf. They were adapting, slowly, painfully, shedding their old ways in the crucible of this new world, forced to acknowledge that their very survival depended not on their European traditions, but on the ancient wisdom shared by the people they had come to settle among. The golden glow of our fire reminds us of the endless sun that baked the fields that summer, the relentless effort required just to ensure a meager harvest. They needed the food, they needed the shelter, they needed the security, and they needed the Wampanoag to provide all three. This was not a season of easy friendship. This was a season of focused, grueling labor, overseen by the indigenous instructors, ensuring the political deal would hold, ensuring the new partners would survive long enough to serve their strategic purpose. Watch the sparks fly up now, tiny, bright protests against the dark sky. They are the effort of that year's planting, the desperate prayers of the colonists that the harvest would finally be enough. The fire breathes in and out, a gentle rhythm now, a slow golden glow rising against the black velvet night. You feel the warmth settling deep into your bones. The cedar snaps. Once a sharp, quick sound, then silence returns, swallowing the noise, leaving only the softest crackle, a mesmerizing flicker across the rough-hewn logs of the settlement walls. We were speaking of Ousamequin, the great sachem, a leader burdened by the shifting alliances of his territory. He watched the newcomers, not just with suspicion, but with a calculating need, his people weakened by the great dying, the terrible sickness brought by earlier ships, a sickness that left villages empty and the spirits of the land restless. The firelight dances on the ancient shadows of the forest edge, where the Wampanoag scouts watched silently, their presence known only by the sudden stillness of the nighttime woods. They saw the pilgrims struggling, their small gardens failing in the strange soil, their numbers dwindling with every harsh winter storm. The embers beneath the main logs are a deep pulsing red, a steady hypnotic sight, promising security in the vast dark wilderness. For the pilgrims, survival was a desperate prayer, their strict beliefs meeting the brutal reality of the new world. They needed the knowledge that only the people of the first light held, the secrets of planting, of fishing, of enduring the long, cold months. They needed Squanto, Tisquantum, the man who walked between two worlds, a figure of immense and complex history, captured, enslaved, returned, now essential. Imagine the fear that night pressed against the pale windows, a fear washed away only by the constant presence of this fire, the warm orange light spilling out onto the frost-damp ground. The colonists feared the unknown sounds, the rustling leaves, the vastness of the trees reaching up into the starless sky, while Ousamequin feared the intentions hidden beneath their thin European clothes, the deeper hunger, the constant search for more land, more power. This arrangement, this crucial political deal, was not born of instant friendship or goodwill. It was a contract of mutual desperation, a truce held together by necessity and the immediate threat of rivals. The Narragansett to the west were powerful, unscathed by the recent plagues, and they watched the weak alliance forming at Plymouth with interest and malice. Listen closely to the fire. It whispers secrets now, the shifting sands of loyalty. The smell of smoke is heavy and earthy, a scent that links us to that time, to the anxiety that kept both Pilgrim and Wampanoag awake, wondering if the treaty would last until morning. The fire is low now, smoldering gently. The flames have pulled back, settling into the heartwood, leaving the edges bathed in soft amber. Ousamequin understood that the English were a shield, a temporary defense against his own indigenous rivals. He demanded a strict pledge of assistance.
In military conflict, and the colonists Thomas Prence and William Bradford agreed. They needed peace. They needed food. They needed the fire of alliance to keep the ice of extinction at bay. The darkness outside the circle of light is absolute, a reminder of the immense forests that surrounded the tiny Plymouth Rock settlement, a world that belonged entirely to the Wampanoag, where their paths and trails crisscrossed the territory like veins. The Pilgrims were guests, temporary and vulnerable, clinging to the edges of the coast. Watch the way the sparks drift up, rising high above the plume of smoke, disappearing into the cosmic expanse. They are like the prayers and hopes of both groups, tiny, fragile lights
lifted into the immense, indifferent sky. The golden glow catches the faint outline of a sleeping child near the hearth, safe for this one night, protected by the strength of the sachems. Word Squanto's role was paramount. His presence assured Ousamequin that negotiations would be fair. His lessons taught the colonists how to plant the corn, fish side by side with herring, how to tread lightly on the ancient earth. He was the bridge, the vulnerable connection, and his loyalty was constantly being weighed by both sides, a delicate balance in the smoldering conflict of cultures. The sound of the wood turning to charcoal is a deep, soothing hiss, the fire drawing inward for the long watch of the night. We sit here, warm and protected by the ancient fire ritual, contemplating this fragile truce, the difficult political maneuvering that set the stage for the autumn harvest. Not a mythic party, but a strategic declaration, a demonstration of strength and alliance to the watching Narragansett. The fire settles further down into a bed of glowing embers, a deep red hearth, promising quiet. The world outside is entirely silent, save for the occasional soft click of the burning wood, a constant reminder of the gentle, watchful presence of the fire, keeping the long, dark night at bay. The cedar crackles softly tonight, a sound like whispered secrets carried on the low breeze. Feel the deep, persistent warmth of the fire, spreading across your chest and shoulders, a shield against the ancient shadows that gather just beyond the reach of the golden glow. We settle deeper into this moment, this silence, watching the flames dance tall and true. The wood is smoldering now, turning to rich, dark charcoal beneath a shield of brilliant orange embers. A lone spark drifts upward, a tiny temporary star, briefly returning to the universe before dissolving into the darkness above the trees. We have seen the English pilgrims arrive. We have witnessed their starvation, their utter reliance on the land they did not understand. We saw Tisquantum, the interpreter, bridging two vastly different worlds. His knowledge, a currency more valuable than any gold the pilgrims carried. But the survival of Plymouth was not secured by kindness alone. It was secured by necessity, by the cold, hard logic of a political deal. Massasoit, Ousamequin, the great sachem of the Wampanoag, understood balance and power better than any man in either camp. He looked past the strange garments and the pale, thin faces of the newcomers, and saw only an opportunity. He saw not allies in friendship, but tools against his powerful rivals, the aggressive and ever-encroaching Narragansett to the west. The fire breathes a low hiss, reminding us that even the strongest alliances are forged in the heat of conflict or threat. The treaty established in March of 1621 was the cornerstone of the peace, a binding commitment that lasted for 50 years. Imagine the scene in the rough settlement of Plymouth, the firelight of a different hearth, perhaps, flickering on the serious faces of Governor Carver and Massasoit. The air was thick with translated phrases, heavy promises, and unspoken skepticism, a deep divide of culture and worldview bridging the small space between them. The Pilgrims needed protection and guaranteed food access. The Wampanoag needed a buffer, a military deterrent to ensure their own sovereignty. This was a truce signed in mutual fear rather than mutual affection. The formal agreement itself was both simple and immense. 6 crucial articles, hammered out word by slow word by Tisquantum. The first article was clear and direct. No injury